The Ellises and the Time Machine. Why do we have to say Black Lives Matters? Written by DeVale Ellis, illustrated by H. Pax. It was the perfect Saturday afternoon in the Brooklyn at the Ellis house. 9-year-old Jackson and his father DeVale were watching the basketball game in the living room when Jackson curiously asked, "Yo, Pops, why do we have to say Black Lives Matter? Doesn't everyone know that?" "You would think so," said DeVale. But it isn't racist to but isn't it racist to only say Black Lives Matter? Asked Jackson. DeVale turned off the TV and turned to Jackson. Black Lives Matter doesn't mean that only Black Lives Matter. It was time for reinforcement, so DeVale called for Kadeen. Kay! Kadeen walked into the living room with the 3-year-old Kaz on her hip and 4-year-old Cairo on her tail. "Why are you screaming as if there's a fire?" DeVale asked Kadeen. "Because I'm dealing with something more dangerous than a fire," said DeVale. "All right, everybody head to Jackson's room. It's time for a history lesson." "History is boring," said Jackson. "I'm too young for history lessons," says Cairo, shaking his head. "Well," said Kadeen, "how do you expect to know where you're going if you don't know how you got here?" "That's right, and history is never boring when you're learning the truth," said DeVale excitingly. DeVale ran to Jackson's room in excitement. "I can't believe we're missing the game for a history lesson," Jackson said. "You and your big mouth," Jackson said, Cairo. DeVale was super excited because he knew that the boys had no clue what was behind the closed door. As DeVale opened the closet doors, a huge bright light followed by a gust of wind finally got everybody's attention. Jackson jumped up. "What the?" Kadeen cut him off before he could even think of finishing his sentence. "Watch your mouth, boy." Cairo jumped in. "Daddy, is that a time machine?" said DeVale. "Wow." The inside of the closet that holds Jackson's clothes and sneakers now looks like a spaceship. Kadeen buckled Kaz in and made her way to the cockpit. "This time machine is only accessible with parental guidance. Buckle up. It's time for adventure," said Kadeen. Kadeen typed in the year 1619 as the veil raised his hand high and yelled, "Countdown! We all say truth on one." The family counted down together. 3, 2, 1. Truth! As Kadeen smashed the big red button. With warp speed, the family zoomed to a different dimension where 1619 was the present day. Slavery. In August of 1619, a ship settled on the shore of Fort Monroe in Hampton, Virginia. An English nobleman by the name of Robert Rich unloaded approximately 20 African captives off the White Lion ship. This sparked a huge point in chattel slavery in America. Chattel slavery was legal under law and allowed for enslaved Africans to be bought and sold as property for free labor. Civil War from 1861 to 1865. The northern states, known as the Union, and the southern states, known as the Confederates, fought over state slavery and states' rights. The 7 Confederate states, South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas, wanted to continue to own slaves and expand slavery into the West following the election of President Abraham Lincoln. The Confederacy declared war with hopes of starting their own country, but ultimately lost to the Union. Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, which symbolized the freedom of enslaved Africans. Congress formally passed the 13th Amendment to abolish slavery 2.5 years later in 1865. The Union Army entered Texas on June 1865 to mark the end of the Civil War and enforce the abolishment of slavery. Today, this day is known as Juneteenth. The Vagrancy Act. Although formerly enslaved Africans were now free, a law was put into place in Virginia, then followed throughout the Confederate States, that forced any person who appeared to be unemployed or homeless to work in plantations. This law directly targeted new free blacks looking to rebuild their lives after the war in 1866. The Vagrancy Act remained into a law until 1904. Black codes. Although the Confederate South lost the Civil War, its leaders waged a political war on the freedom of black people. In 1865 into 1866, southern states like Mississippi and South Carolina began enforcing laws which made it mandatory for blacks to work under labor contracts and carry written documents. Newly freed Southern blacks were at risk of being arrested and getting into forced labor again. They were not allowed to vote, carry weapons for protection, gather in groups for worship, or learn how to read or write. Although Northern and Western states did not enforce the exact laws, many discouraged free blacks from residing there. Jim Crow. During the Reconstruction era, the former Confederate states created laws that demanded separate public spaces based on race. These spaces included restrooms, restaurants, schools, libraries, and public transportation. In 1896, the U.S. Supreme Court used a Plessy versus Ferguson case to uphold the separate but equal doctrine after the Reconstruction era. The facilities for blacks were rarely equal, as the majority were either underfunded, inhumane, or non existent. In fact, many public places in the South refused to create separate accommodations for blacks or refused to allow them access altogether. Racial segregation by Jim Crow laws were considered constitutional until they were in turn overruled by the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The Ku Klux Klan. In the mid 1860s, the KKK formed to prevent black people from gaining political power and sought to suppress their rights. The group upheld white supremacy by using voter intimidation and targeting violence towards blacks, now known as African Americans. This secret organization was composed of Southern white men that often wore white robes, face masks, and burned crosses to evoke intimidation. Convict leasing. Many Southern leaders in government and in business wanted to find a new way to make money after chattel slavery ended in 1865. As slavery was now illegal, several states used the Vagrancy Act and other black codes to imprison free black people, forcing them to work for free as prisoners in the southern states. Convict leasing existed in America under different names until it was abolished on December 12th, 1941. The Tulsa Race Massacre. Although many free black people struggled to rebuild their lives after slavery, some got their footing. O.W. Gurley, a black landowner, educator, and entrepreneur, built the Greenwood Business District known as Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma. He supported other black entrepreneurs to develop Black Wall Street over 15 years as a beautiful community filled with homes, businesses, and schools. On Memorial Day weekend, 1921, Black Wall Street experienced an event it would never recover from. It all started when Sarah Page, a white woman operating an elevator, screamed sexual assault escalating during the police investigation after Dick Rowland, a young black man, entered the elevator. Rumors and accusations of sexual assault escalated during the police investigation, and outraged, armed mob of white people rioted Black Wall Street. As many as 300 black people died, over 800 were injured, and the 35 city blocks were burned to the ground. Sadly, this event has been left out of many history books. Redlining. In 1934, during the Great Depression, the National Housing Act was enacted to address housing instability. The Federal Housing Administration was established to launch a mortgage insurance program, which consequently led to further segregation and gaps in fair opportunities between white and black communities. The new housing market provided more housing and neighborhood improvements for white middle class and lower middle class families while pushing Black families into urban housing projects. Additionally, housing credit for mortgages in Black neighborhoods was often denied. Special benefits were extended to real estate developers who were building neighborhoods for white Americans with the understanding that no home could be sold to Black people. This promoted segregation and continued to contribute to the wealth gap seen today. Police brutality. In 1954, during the Civil Rights Movement, Black Americans began experiencing extreme physical violence at the hands of the local police. The attacks were photographed and caught on camera while protesters demonstrated nonviolent resistance and civil disobedience. Local governments often militarized their police forces against the nonviolent Black protesters, using water hoses, dogs, batons, and excessive force that resulted in physical assaults, numerous arrests, and deaths. The Black Panther Party. After decades of using civil disobedience and nonviolent protests to combat racial injustices and police brutality, the Black Party for Self-Defense was created by college student Bobby Seale and Huey Newton in 1966. The core purpose of this group was to empower and protect Black neighborhoods against police brutality. In response to the Black Panther Party, the U.S. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover led and developed a program called COINTELPRO to discredit and criminalize the party. COINTELPRO was a counterintelligence program responsible for causing major internal conflicts within the party and the assassination of many influential leaders like Fred Hampton and Mark Clark. Shut up! See me doing this. The war on drugs. In 1971, just a few years after the end of segregation and gaining the right to vote during the Civil Rights Movement, President Richard Nixon announced the war on drugs. The national initiatives used both federal and local law enforcement to target Black Americans and leaders by disrupting and over policing their communities. In 1986, Congress passed the Anti Drug Abuse Act, providing funds for more militarized police forces in Black communities and harsher sentences for drug related crimes. This created soaring arrest rates for Black people. Mass incarceration. Although slavery ended in 131 years earlier and segregation 29 years prior, many Black people struggled to thrive after the civil rights movements because of redlining, police brutality, and federal legislations that continue to target and terrorize Black communities. In 1994, the largest crime bill in the history of the United States was passed, the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act. This bill created a surge in the number of arrests of Black men and women. They were given harsher sentences while private companies began profiting from their prison industrial complex. Black Lives Matter. In July 2013, the Black Lives Matter movement was created by Alicia Garza, Opal Tometi, and Patrisse Cullors after the state of Florida failed to convict the murder of an unarmed 17-year-old Black boy, Trayvon Martin, using the state's Stand Your Ground law. The Black Lives Matter movement mobilizes where youth meet most on social media, and this is a declaration to revolt against police brutality and a corrupt criminal justice system that profiles, targets, profits off of, and oftentimes kills Black Americans without consequence. Hey, babe, said Kadeen. I think it's time to go back. Okay, Ellises, time to go back, said DeVale. The family put on their glasses, and DeVale hit the red button. A huge white flash appeared, and the Ellises were instantly home. Now, back in Jackson's room after a journey that covered over 400 years, DeVale said, "So you see, we say Black Lives Matter to remind America that they forgot about us when they said, with liberty and justice for all. So all we are asking for is equality, right, Pops?" said Jackson. "Yeah, bro. It's crazy that we still have to ask for it," said DeVale. Jackson runs to open his closet. "Hey, where y'all going?" asked Kadeen. "The history lesson is over." You don't want to finish watching the game with your dad? Are you kidding me? We need to change. I can't change anything while watching the game. We need action, exclaimed Jackson. Jackson, yeah, said Cairo. Yeah, said Kaz, speaking for the first time. Jackson pushed his mom and dad out of the room and closed the door. Do you think I shared too much? DeVille asked Kadeen. Not at all. If they're anything like you, they'll work together to change the world for the better, said Kadeen as she gave DeVille a warm hug. We got work to do, gentlemen, said Jackson. Yeah, screamed Cairo and Kaz in unity. The end.